Okay, so welcome to another episode of Learning for Truth and Love. Today, I'm really excited to have our guest, Dr. Kimberly Weems, here from North Carolina Central University, as our guest. Before we get started, I really want to take just a moment to remind folks the goal of my podcast and Learning for Truth and Love is to really bring a nuanced way of thinking about learning. Oftentimes, we learn about learning from people who might be our influencers, right? Maybe people who are writing, maybe we might learn them from research articles that we read, but oftentimes we don't get a nuanced perspective, especially for different spaces, whether K-12 or even higher education. And so I've been very specific in the guests that I choose, especially when I think about how we combine our lived experience and how it influences what we research, what we teach, how we learn, how we view the world. And so hopefully my goal in this podcast is to just bring a way of thinking about learning and about the world differently. Okay. So, Dr. Weems, welcome to Learning for Truth and Love. And I always ask, guests, rather than reading your biography, I always find it more interesting for you to talk about yourself.
Okay.
Um, and let's start there. I'm gonna have talk about yourself. I give some background about yourself, your academic experience, thinking about your qualifications, your research, your teaching of math, and your experience in general. Just give us an overview. And just to remind folks, today we're talking about the state of mathematics. So welcome.
Thank you, Dr. Quinlan. So, yes, I grew up in Georgia and really always enjoyed math, always enjoyed science in general. I
Nice.
credit my mom for that. She taught middle school science, biology, life science for over 30 years in
Well,
the Georgia public school system. And I spent a
hmm
lot of time after school in her biology lab, just playing around with all of her equipment and playing with her books. And she also on occasion taught math at times.
nice.
And so that's really where my interests developed. And after high school, I attended Spelman College in
Okay,
Atlanta,
nice.
majored in math and minored in Spanish.
Okay.
And really just wasn't quite sure if I was going to major in math actually, but I developed a
Mhm.
love for math there and decided that I wanted to continue my studies with math. I left and went to University of Maryland, College
Mhm.
Park for my master's and PhD. And formally, officially, I was in the applied math program. My dissertation work is with a statistician. So I say that my research is more on the statistics side, even though my degree formally says applied math. And my research basically looks more at probability distribution. So I would say,
Mhm.
even in statistics, most people think of statistics as being very applied and doing a lot of number crunching, data analysis. I really did, though, focus a little bit more on the theoretical side. And I look at, what if people study these standard probability distributions, but what if they really aren't good for representing your data? What can you do? So I look at ways to tweak those distributions so that you can model your data a little bit better. After Maryland, I left and I did a postdoc at North Carolina State
Mhm.
University in the
Okay.
statistics department and worked there in a faculty role for several years before I came to Central.
Wow. Awesome. Well, thank you so much. It's interesting. I asked you for a little bit more in depth than I usually might ask because I find the journey from math, especially considering it's an important topic in our society, it's equally more important when we think about the journey. And so I'm fascinated. I do have some questions, but I was really intrigued when you said, you were in your mom's lab, life science, because it's now I'm thinking, wow, your mom is to me as I am to my son, right?
Yes, absolutely.
Because I find myself, even though I would take my son with me to different things, conferences and have him do, play with experiments and tools and stuff like that, and do, I'm more biology. I emphasize the math with him, and giving him special math experiences. So I'm so curious before I start these questions, what do you think in that experience, with your mom and the lab, was there a carryover? Was there something about that experience that might have facilitated or piqued your interest in math, just out of curiosity?
Yeah, it is. It is interesting that I ended up going more of the math route
Mm-hmm.
than because I did spend so much time. So I mentioned from time to time she did teach math,
Mm-hmm.
and so she still had a lot of math books.
Oh, okay.
And my sister and I spent a lot of time playing school. And so I saw a lot of those books, even though, at that point they were at such a higher level, but I did actually look at the books and look at the math in the books. I'm not sure if that's what did it, but
Mm-hmm.
even just science in general, I kind of trailed behind her going to a
Mm-hmm.
lot of different science fairs.
Yeah,
I
nice.
would go to science fairs at closest colleges to us. Actually, the closest one at that point was Berry College in Rome, Georgia. And so I remember going to several of those science fairs with her. I did in high school participate in, there was a math quiz bowl, and that was just a group of us that would meet, study, do math problems. And then certain weekends we would travel again to nearby colleges to compete
Mm-hmm.
in these math competitions. And I grew up in a really small town, Cartersville, Georgia. It's
Mm-hmm.
about 40 miles north of Atlanta. My high school, the highest math that my high school offered at that time was pre-calculus. So
Okay.
there was no calculus opportunities for me to take calculus. I hear these advanced placement. We didn't have many advanced placement courses there, definitely
Mm-hmm.
not in math. And I remember going to these competitions. And at that point, I didn't know what an integral sign was. You know,
Mm-hmm.
some of the schools, some of the students we would compete with, they
Mm-hmm.
attended schools where calculus was offered. They had
Yeah.
actually seen integration. I had not. And so I remember coming back, saying to my teacher, I said, "Oh yeah, what was that symbol?" I didn't know what that S meant. But yeah, I don't really know where the math part, but I think it was just more of her curiosity.
Mm-hmm.
Every time, she would get so excited about science. She would
Right.
get so excited about discoveries. And I think, with math, there's still so much to learn and
Mm-hmm.
discover. And it just kind of that pushed me in that direction.
Wow. I have even more questions now. I guess because it's and you and I know how intriguing, our perceptions of math. I'm holding off. I'm trying to hold off talking about our perceptions because I'm so curious as to what you're going to say. But no, it's amazing when I think about the connections between math and science. And you mentioned the science fair because, as a classroom teacher, when I was a high school biology teacher, I gave a science fair. I started a science fair actually for years, and I was amazed by how much math the students were looking at. I had students who would never communicate, who maybe didn't really communicate with me outside. Because of the science fair, they would come to me, and this is I remember talking to a student who didn't speak as much English, right? And so these are not your students who we consider your high performers. And so, but she came to me, we were discussing a graph. She was looking at this malaria graph, and I remember it vividly because, these were just became experiences. It wasn't just an isolated learning, but it's amazing the carryover there is between science and having that context. I'm curious about one more thing before I go into our main topic, which is, do you feel like, because when I think about the fact that science, gives you that context for understanding the why and the what in math, do you feel like, and I know you may not remember, do you feel like you were just going along with the journey, or it was more, gosh, I love math. I'm going for these extended, because when I think about learning, one of the big indicators for me of learning is really what you like to do outside of the classroom, right? And the fact that you were going for all of these things.
I enjoyed it. So I'm a proponent of, like you said, these external experiences. They are so important and very important for me.
Very defining.
But yes, just some summer programs that I did in high school that supplemented what I got at my high school.
Mm-hmm.
Was I going along for the journey? I enjoyed it. I wanted to learn more. I mean, as I mentioned, when I got to college, I did not initially come in thinking that I would major in math. But when
Mm-hmm.
I got to the point where I realized that I had satisfied my math credits, I
Mm-hmm.
realized that, oh my goodness, I won't take math anymore. And that, which really, I was like, no, that was not a happy feeling to me, And
Yeah.
that was when I realized, I said, oh gosh, I think math is what I really want to study. And I just couldn't see myself not learning more math.
Wow. And so I ask you those questions because I'm sure my son doesn't see himself doing math at all, but that's been a part of his journey. And so I'm always looking for cues. And lately, my cue has been, well, if he doesn't resist or say no or, say, oh, I hate that, that's my cue enough, to keep going. With kids, we're still figuring it out, right? Kids are still figuring
Yeah.
out, and you're still, you know, identifying, thinking of what you learn.
Yeah, it's
But yeah.
definitely kids are still figuring out. And I think even in high school here, I feel like there's such a push now when students are applying to college to know exactly what they plan to major in. And to me, that's just I don't see it because I'm like, oh, they're probably going to change their minds. And there's so much to explore.
Hmm.
And a lot of times children just don't realize how math is connected to so many different areas
Absolutely.
and not even realizing that they're doing math or just the need for math. So
Mm-mm.
I think sometimes it takes a while for someone to realize that, if they want to be a math major or something just related. There's so many related areas that rely on math that I think after just from your experiences, as you said,
Hmm.
from your experiences, you kind of fall in and you realize, I need to take more statistics or more math or science because this is going to be useful to me.
Right.
Yeah.
And hopefully it's not like most people, not most, but some people I've known who realize too late that they need it and then are scrambling to, oh, I want to do computers, but I really need to finish this math, or I want to do science, but I really need to finish this math. And I remember I used to give students these case studies to look at, when they were in high school, they got to see, oh, where the scientist struggled with math, and he realized he had to go back and learn the math, and they were really surprised, like, oh, really? They were, I'm not the only
Right.
one.
Yes. Yes. And so, you know, I'm department chair, interim department
Hmm.
chair
Yeah,
currently.
awesome.
And I do hear students sometimes say, oh, yeah, this is going to be my last math class. And I do try to encourage students, but hey, you might want to go on and take a little bit more math, even though you've
Hmm.
satisfied your requirements. This helps you, so much in terms of your thinking, your logical
Hmm.
reasoning. There's just so many different areas that studying more math can assist you with.
Absolutely. But so today I wanted to invite you because I really wanted to talk about um, the state of math. So if you could first talk about a little bit briefly about your experience teaching math. And if you could go into how would you describe the state of math today
Hey, that's an
based on your
excellent
experience? Yeah.
question. Yes. So, we're in the post-pandemic time. So now, I think I'll say the math community is struggling in terms of making sure that we are proficient in math, that students are getting what they need. Find even more so now that students are coming into college underprepared in math and really just not necessarily, well, they feel that they're nervous. They need a confidence boost. They need to review. Math is something that you may have learned it, you may have seen it before,
Hmm.
but you need to go back and review before they move on. So I think that review is so important right now because there are things that they probably missed.
Hmm.
You need to fill in the gaps. Math, I think, is very exciting and very, very relevant. I'm encouraged by, movies where math is showcased, such,
Yeah.
Hidden Figures. I think it was
Hmm.
wonderful, just a wonderful way to
Yeah.
showcase math. and the importance of math. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
but I do feel that students these days are often discouraged, and because they feel that a lot of times math is seen as this is the subject that determines whether or not you're smart. I hear
Mm.
that all the time.
Mm.
I'm not,
Okay.
it just seems to, so if you're not placed in that advanced math class in middle school,
Mm.
then you kind of at that point start feeling,
Interesting.
oh, well, maybe I'm not as smart
Mm-hmm.
because I didn't make the
Sure.
advanced class. And I think that's a terrible way because with math, maybe at sixth grade or seventh grade, you're not quite at that point. But I've seen people, I've experienced it with family members who catch up.
Mm-hmm.
We don't all learn in the same rate, the same
Right.
way. And so maybe, in seventh grade you're not ready for that advanced math, but you
Mm-hmm.
catch up in
Wow.
6 months or so. So I think the state of math is exciting, but I
Mm-hmm.
do think we need to realize that, at this post pandemic state that we need to do some review to help students regain their confidence in doing math.
Wow. I have so many questions. My goodness, because my tendency is to think, when you say the word live learned it, it's very hard for me to picture when I think of learning that you just lose that like that, right? And so I always question, well, did they really learn it? And I know that, being a professor, instructor, teacher, we get to see the trends over the years. And so in observing, in terms of what you've observed, I think you mentioned there was this kind of like a downward trending. And so what I'm curious about is, you know, what is it about this downward trending? Do you think it's because are we expecting more? Where have we also changed? We know that students have changed, but is it that they're not performing as well and they're really unprepared, or are we expecting more? And I'm curious as to what you might have even observed as far as what are maybe are some were some trends that you maybe society or K-12 environment was going through that you might have even observed on the in the college, because I would observe trends. I'll tell you that afterwards, but I'm curious about what do you think might have also been trending, that might have contributed to it?
Yeah. Well, I do think with math, writing helps. So, what trends do I see in the classroom? I see my students doing, they take out their phone and they take a photo of the notes
Ooh, okay.
instead of actually writing things down. And I do
Yeah,
think writing helps that
absolutely.
your memory to understand the steps. And if you're just taking a picture, and we know when we take photos on our phone,
Mm,
where do they end up? Do they end up in an organized fashion? Not often, they don't. And
yeah.
so that's one thing that I've noticed
Wow.
in
That's
terms of
huge.
just the note taking aspect.
Yeah.
I also think about the fact that a lot of there's a lot of online math help, which is great.
Mhm. Mhm.
But it's a different approach because once again,
Mm.
they're not always writing something. So
Mm.
I mean, even typing is a different type of typing if you're typing in an
Mhm.
equation.
Right.
And how does that help with the retention?
Mhm.
How does that help with the learning? It's a different way of learning.
Yeah.
Distractions,
Mm.
distractions in the classroom, such as
Yeah.
phones, which is something that I've learned and observed
Mm.
with students. So those are a few things
Those
that
are big.
I deal with when with teaching.
Wow.
And then of course AI.
Mm.
Again, new technologies, new developments,
Mhm.
great. How do we use them so that it's beneficial? Right? So if you're solving an equation and there are all these online equation solvers now,
Mhm.
it's not enough to just get the answer.
Mm.
Are you really, are students really understanding how to get the answer, what the answer means, the steps, the logic involved?
Right.
Yeah.
Wow. Wow. It's so interesting. And I know when you and I had chatted briefly, we even talked about the influence of culture, right? And our trending in our culture does not contribute to learning math, right? And I want to say, and this will infuse some of my education observations too. Writing is really important when it comes to that, right? Because I remember when I've had students doing well, and I remember having this student even come up in front of the class and explain to the class what you're doing, so that she can explain what she's doing and that they're not. And she said, "Oh, well, I would just go home and rewrite my notes," right? And so the process of writing itself, it's going to become so much more important, um, in the future now, because we don't have as much opportunity. So the whole mechanics of it, we're talking about how the brain works, right? You're talking about motor skills being combined with visual skills, being combined with, it's a processing, it's a
Yes.
processing opportunity. Whereas you snap a picture, and the worst part of it is because they have so many resources, they are fooled into thinking that their familiarity in looking at the screen means that they know. And so they're going to be even more fooled than they've ever been before,
Uh-huh.
you know?
Exactly.
And so what we think is needed is not necessarily what will be needed. And the worst part of this is the way we integrate writing with the math and the requirements for it. I find it's in the most, I want to say the word useless, but I know it's not all useless. It's just in the more, and I want to say the word boring, which, most kids would find it boring, but it's almost not capturing where the writing is needed, right? Because you don't always need the writing in math, and I don't like the fact that, for example, my son will just do the calculations sometimes in his head, and he doesn't like to write it down, per se. And
Hmm.
sometimes it's okay to just do it in your head, right? And
Yes.
so, because we don't credit the kid who is able to conceptualize things mentally and process it, we don't see that as an advancement. We have them writing in the wrong areas at the wrong time,
Hmm.
and it simply seems like it's just because it's following something formulaic, a formula that we have, right? Because we can't, we're not breaking outside the box. Whereas it's different, like you said, you're doing a science fair, they have to write things down, they have to, it's without a purpose. That's what I meant to say. All of that just to come back, you
Hmm.
know? So you really said some important things that, you know, make sense, but it just, that's why you're here. It wouldn't have like, oh, that makes sense.
Well, I know even when I was working on my dissertation, and what I encourage graduate students to do is, as they work, go ahead and type it up, right? If you're working on a proof, once you think you have that proof completed, type it. And I always found that when I'm actually typing, I write it out first, but then you start typing it again, that's when I would catch my mistakes.
Mm-hmm.
Or gaps. And I actually, this isn't quite right. I've left something out I need to add in
Mm-hmm.
because I'm missing a piece, or, the logic isn't there. And so it's that process of going back and reviewing and really trying to make sure that it's exact and precise. And it really helps.
Yeah.
And so that's, on one level, graduate level. I would say for myself in elementary and middle school, I noticed that, and I think it was because I enjoyed math,
Mm-hmm.
that after the summer, when I go back, you ask the question, is it that you, you never actually learned it, or that you've forgotten it? I felt at that point, I always kind of cringed. I noticed that I felt like I had forgotten. So I
Mm-hmm.
remember those first few days of the new school year.
Mm-hmm.
We get our books, and then I'm like, yeah, I certainly did. I
Mm-hmm.
remember we went over this, but
Right.
boy, I don't quite remember this.
Mm-hmm.
Lucky for me, you know, I would take my book home and go back and do some self review
Mm-hmm.
because I enjoyed math. But I recognized that I said, yeah, I knew that. I did learn that, but boy,
Mm-hmm.
I'm not quite ready to go on.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I do think some of it is you do fool yourself sometimes in believing that you've learned it. But sometimes I think that, math is something that you really do have to constantly review
Right.
because you're building on top of what you've already learned.
Makes
And
sense.
so if it's been 3 months
Mm-hmm.
and you haven't been working, you haven't been doing math,
Mm-hmm.
like you're used to doing math, and yeah, you've forgotten a little bit and you need to go back and review. And
Mm-hmm.
if you don't do that review, then it's like you take a step forward, but then you fall back and you keep
Mm-hmm.
falling back. And so it's harder to kind of get over that hump again, especially since oh gosh, you think I did know how to do that, and it can
Mm-hmm.
become frustrating, right? That
Right.
and I do think that's where students become frustrated.
Yeah.
They've been exposed and they know that they've seen it, and I have students tell me all the time, I just can't perform, or I can't do this on a test, but I know how to do this. And
Mm-hmm.
it's a sense of frustration.
Yeah. I can see that. And I can also see more and more where students are skipping practicing, right? Like you took that initiative, you saw that need, but a lot of times students will tell themselves, "Oh, I'm familiar. Oh, I'll skip that practice." You
Right.
know, and
Uh-huh.
we've been in college. I've been in college. There are things that would have benefited. It's almost as if I think I would have wished having a better awareness of how I learn. And even thinking of metacognition, the ability to think about you know you're learning on a deeper level. I'm just wondering if that's one of the bigger mark we're missing, because a lot of times I find that students don't really know what it takes, right?
Yes, I agree. Uh, you know, they say, I always remind my students, right? We're in class. You need to spend 2 to 3 hours outside of class
Mhm.
reviewing the material. And I just don't think that really happens that often anymore. The time, spent out of class, it's really needed to get that deeper understanding.
It's like an understanding of the consequences, right? We do consequences in so many other areas of our life except in learning. What are the consequences of that lack of carryover?
Exactly. And I do, and I advocate for, I like group work
Hmm.
in class. I think
Okay.
that's good. But I also think during the group work, you do learn things, but sometimes you can once again fool yourself into thinking that you know it when it was actually one of your group members who
Mm,
really helped you get to a certain point. And
yeah.
that's why that time outside of class, I believe, is so important, because a
Hmm.
lot of times that's going to be so, I think you need group work, but I do think you need some individual work as well. I said you need both,
Absolutely.
just to really make sure that you understand,
Hmm.
and that you're not being carried along with the group,
Right.
so that when test time comes,
Hmm.
where you do have to perform solo,
Hmm.
you can do it.
Hmm. Yep. Absolutely. Because it's the group knows, right, collectively, but you
Yeah,
individually don't.
exactly, exactly.
Wow. So I'm so curious as to, and I love the writing example you gave, because I even teaching high school biology, for years, I got to observe what was happening on the elementary and middle school level that affected eventually what happened when they went to the college, the high school level, right? And the example that stands out to me all the time is just for that short period of time when they took phonics out. When students got to me at the high school level, they couldn't really break down the science words anymore, right? Because I would have them read, they would read a word, and even without me, it's like, oh, if you have a hard time, pronouncing, I would have them so break it down, and then they had that challenge of breaking it down. So I'm curious as to, what else you might have observed, um, that, in terms of trends over the years, that might have carried over to where we are today in math, because those trendings are really important. I mean, as a teacher, I used to know which class the student had before me in the last grade for the whole year, right? Depending on which teacher they came from, you would see how they did based on what was emphasized, because biology is one of those very, it's an applied science that we often teach first, but I think we should teach closer to the end. because it's applied. What we teach is like it's not. And so it depends. Some people can teach it like it's not. So I'm just curious to say if there were any other trends you observed.
Any other trends? Well, sure. If I'm trying to think of other trends that I've observed, I teach a number of first year college students
Mm,
just in the general education courses,
mm,
as well as I teach some major courses. But those first year students, I'll say just one, I won't necessarily say I've observed this, but I know that there's been a lot of talk in the mathematics community about your first college course.
mm-hmm,
Should that be college algebra? Or should we rethink, should it be something else? And in terms of trends, there's a community that is really advocating for data science.
mm-hmm,
So with the amount of data that we're
mm-hmm,
producing and just where we are in society right now,
mm-hmm,
data science is definitely trending.
mm-hmm,
Here at Central, our largest math course for incoming freshmen is college algebra, which we're finding that a lot of the students are struggling. And maybe with the trend towards data science, we hear so much about it now. Perhaps that first course should be moved a little bit more towards data science. Certainly that's an area that is going to touch on so many majors, that's
right.
needed in so many majors. So perhaps we should rethink,
Mm-hmm,
instead of having, we have over 30 sections of college algebra each
mm-hmm,
fall. Maybe we should be thinking, okay, perhaps some of these students would be better served with data
mm-hmm.
science.
Yeah, I like
And I
that.
think that's just a trend that we're just seeing in our society. And maybe we
Mm-hmm,
just need to rethink, given how students are, I mean, of course, I would, I don't want to dismiss algebra
mm-mm,
and what students are learning from that process.
mm-hmm.
But, you know, there are some other skills that we
Wow,
could so emphasize.
I
So
love that.
that's definitely a big topic in the
Yeah.
math community right now.
That's great. It's interesting that you said that too for several reasons. One is I could almost see people thinking that you would need more understanding to go towards data science versus algebra. But I think data science is just a great place to start, just for a lot of reasons, because you're talking about integrating critical thinking and thinking skills that sometimes students come with already that may not show up in algebra, because algebra is something completely different. And I could see data science giving them an opportunity to build in the why, right? Why is this
Exactly.
important? Why learn it? Where they can actually observe the trends themselves, right? And they could even build the equation themselves, right? Because a lot of times we think we need to hand it to the students when
Exactly.
they're capable of making these same observations. That,
Mhm.
and so we end up putting something higher on a pedestal, as if it's higher learning compared to, or they need to work up to that, not realizing that it requires a basic type of processing skills where, if proper facilitated, right, you can help students to attain that way of thinking that maybe they might enjoy and become interested enough in the math itself.
Yes, I completely agree. They can relate the data science to so many different areas,
Hmm.
deciding what domain do I want to focus on.
Right.
You have that hook of piquing their interest.
Absolutely.
And then of course there's going to be probably at some point some algebra that's going to come up with what they're doing. Also, our students are very computer savvy.
Hmm.
So the computational aspect of it, being able to bring that in
Hmm.
and getting students involved,
Hmm.
doing that background, you know,
Awesome.
sometimes not even, there's so many different, I guess, packages, coding packages that, really
Hmm.
at all different levels, depending on your skill set with coding and programming. So I think that's fascinating.
Yeah.
I hear about that trend, still hear about the trend to encourage students to go take calculus in high school. And
Mhm.
so I'll say that, another group that's very much a proponent for, still have the students take that
Mhm.
highest level, which is typically calculus, that they can take in high school, because a number of people feel that if students take calculus, that just leads to more success in the future, more success when they go to college. So, that's that's a different perspective, but certainly,
Yeah.
there's a group of people who push that as well. And sometimes I think that part comes back to the confidence boosting
Mhm.
part. Students don't shy away from calculus and still feel that, um, yes, I have the ability. I have the
Mhm.
ability to do calculus. Sometimes I at least here, at Central, students are really scared of calculus. I just finished a project that was really focusing on building co-requisites in to help
Mhm.
students through pre-calculus and calculus. And these were primarily for STEM majors.
Mhm.
But it becomes very difficult for students to do well in their major, their STEM major, if they, have these difficulties, particularly at calculus and
Mhm.
getting through calculus.
Yeah.
So this philosophy is, well, encourage students to take calculus while they're in high school,
Mhm.
um, so that they have that goal, and that they feel that, yes, I have the ability
Mhm.
to do calculus.
Yeah. I'm so curious as to your perspective on that trend because I feel like I could do a whole podcast episode on calculus. When I look at the think of the dynamics, and even when I think about my own experience, loving math and doing well in math until I got to college calculus. What it makes me wonder now, though, is whether or not and you can tell me your opinion on this. I wonder whether or not that thought comes from the fact that, and may not be, and people may not make that connection, but I wonder if it comes from the fact that, when you're in high school, you have multiple levels of guidance, right? Usually teachers in high school, you're doing that for the whole year, are a little bit more careful in walking you through that, right? Whereas in college, you're expected a certain level of independence, and you may not necessarily know where your own holes are, right? In that, and it's taught in a little bit more of an advanced way. And not only that, when I took that calculus, it was a grad student. And
Mhm,
so it's almost as if you were teaching yourself. And that's been my experience with calculus, and which is why, I make a different effort with, even with my son who he's educated in second, I really want to observe, what goes on so I could see, is it just the math itself, or is it just the way it's taught, you know?
mhm. Yeah. It is hard for me I've seen, because so calculus can be taught in so many different ways. And I've observed students to come in where they were taught understanding the why,
Mhm. Yeah.
whereas other students who have come in taught the steps,
Mhm.
not really understanding the why behind it, but they know
Mhm.
the steps. They know how to take a derivative. They know the rules, the calculus rules.
Yeah. Makes sense.
Which one is going to, I think, balance is really needed.
Mhm.
You need the balance, but I think it's hard for the instructor, you're trying to balance getting through the material,
Mhm.
right? Get through the material
Yeah.
and teach a little bit of the why, but also make sure that they understand the steps.
Mhm.
Um, but getting back to your question about, what do I think students should, I do think it's good to give students, if you can give them a choice.
Mm.
And if we can help students understand that if they don't get to calculus in high school, it's okay.
Mhm.
That is absolutely okay, and it doesn't mean that you're not smart. That's really what I would say. You have time to take calculus
Mhm.
when you get to college,
Yeah.
and that everyone learns at a different pace in a different way.
Absolutely.
So I do think it's good for students to have some flexibility. But the main thing is to make sure that their confidence level
Yeah.
stays high, and that they still want to take, to take more math, to explore more math at their own pace.
Wow.
That would be my recommendation if I could talk to high school students.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow, that's big. Confidence level stays high. It's wow. You brought up something there that's near and dear to my heart. One of the big reasons I took my son out of school and homeschooled him was because of the math. Because I started realizing that at that level, he needed to be taught in a way, and I wanted to continue the trending towards him understanding why he's doing it and not algorithmically. My biggest concern was even with the new Common Core, if you don't quite understand the why yourself, and even when a teacher might say, oh, the Common Core tries to encourage you to understand that there's more than one way, it may not necessarily, that algorithmic way of thinking can go from one way to two ways to three ways without necessarily still understanding the why. And so, from having prepared him to think a certain way and then seeing things trending differently from what I wanted, I took him out. I did the Singapore math with him, just really teaching him to think and getting him back to understanding the why, right?
Okay.
Because then, he was going through, I was like, wait a second, why you don't know the table? And people go from one extreme to the other, right? They think that because, they think, okay, we're not going to do rote, but you need to understand, what you're doing, but you do need to know your table still in order to understand how to do the fractions. So I was able to, in addition to teaching him Singapore math, I put him in a Russian school of math. And of course, in the beginning, I started, I was observing what they were doing and why, and realizing that when I compared the book, the book we use, and I started homeschooling it from fourth grade. When I compared what he was doing in fourth grade, the fourth grade math book with what he was doing there, I said, oh, he's doing seventh grade in fourth grade. And then I started to realize what they were doing. They were helping him to get to the application using things that were complex, that required simple skills. I was like, wow, this is so amazing, right?
Yeah.
And then I also started seeing, oh, he's doing, of course I would peek at his problems now and again. I was like, and he doesn't realize he's doing physics. He's answering physics problems without the formula. Because a lot of times if you ask a student, how far would you go if you're traveling this, miles per whatever, conceptually, they'll know if they need to multiply and they'll know if they need to divide. So having him do that alongside, me going through Singapore math was enough incentive for me to help him understand, hey, let's repeat your tables today once, or let's repeat it twice, and here's the why, and here's how you doing those fractions there will help you to understand what's going on. I'm sorry, you memorizing your table will help you understand that why over there.
Mm-hmm.
And so like you said, we need a healthy balance between the why and the rote,
In the road.
right?
Yes.
Not going from one extreme to the other.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
So interesting.
But the other observations I made was teaching chemistry at a high school level and getting to see the students who didn't understand the fractions had a hard time doing, for example, mole calculations.
Okay.
And then those who did it algorithmically couldn't really carry it over to conceptually what they needed to do because they were so reliant on writing out. And I would see them write this long, complex form. I was like, oh, what is that? Like, they just write this wrong formula.
Yeah.
I still didn't understand what they got and why they got it.
Mm-hmm.
Sorry, I know it's not laughing, but it's just, interesting thinking back.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. Writing out a formula, and I see that sometimes. And I just, I have to ask the student, yeah, do you understand what this means, and does this make sense? And actually just having the skills to go back and look and realize, does this make sense? What you've written. Yeah.
I'm curious as to what you observed, though, in that trying to help them understand the process. What do you observe? I mean, what are some challenges that they have? or just generally, what do you observe in students when you try to help them to change, whether it's their view, their orientation, like what are some challenges and what are some things you try to help them with?
Well, they do ask often about the why. Why do I need to do this?
Yeah.
And it is challenging to help for them to understand that, hey, this is going to help you in so many other aspects of your life because you're
Mhm.
developing these logical reasoning skills, right?
Mhm.
Um, you might not have to do solve some type of use trigonometry, for instance. You might
Mhm.
not, but just the process that we're going through is really going to transfer over and help you in terms of problem solving
Mhm.
skills in, just a variety of areas.
Yeah.
So that's a big question, why do I have to do this?
Mhm.
Also, not having everything be about a grade
Mm.
as opposed to just wanting to learn and understanding and increasing your knowledge and, um, the points and the grade. That's always a big one.
Yeah.
And really stressing to the students that it really does help if you do a little bit every day,
Yeah.
as opposed to waiting to the end of the semester and going into panic mode.
Mhm.
And I try to be flexible, reopening assignments,
Mm.
and that can only help so much, right? Because you have to do a little bit, and again with math, you're building, and it's so much easier if you just start off strong and just do that would help so much. Start off strong at the beginning of the semester and just do your studying, do a little bit every day.
Wow.
Yeah. If I could get that across, I would feel really good.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I think I could see, the need for building an awareness of how you learn. And I can also see, in terms of us changing the infrastructure to really help students understand the why, right? Connected to it. Maybe there'll be a little bit more buy-in. I mean, we're talking about being in an age where we're competing for so many other whys, right?
Yes, that's true.
I don't know how that'll go, but I think there is such a greater need now because the buy-in for college, we can't afford to have students see the consequences until it's too late,
Absolutely.
And, you mentioned even thinking about introducing them to data science initially. I could see that, that being helpful now because there's so much carryover to, I guess just about all the subject areas,
Exactly.
right?
Yes.
That maybe might give them a taste of, because I find it sometimes often because they're on a journey too, right? They're in an identity type of journey where they're figuring out what they want. And so I could see that even that exposure to so many different things, allowing room for them to maybe direct them early on.
Yeah. Um, I definitely think I think that should be explored more, and I think more and more people are starting to look at that. So we'll see where that goes. I am someone who is more of a statistician, that really excites me. We hear
Mhm.
sometimes my fellow statisticians, we laugh because we're like data science, but that's not new. No, we've been doing that for a long time, but now the
Yeah.
buzzword is data science. I know it's a little different
Yeah.
because sometimes in statistics you don't really emphasize it's not all emphasized in one package, the computing, the domain knowledge, right? And the math and stat parts. But I'm glad though. I mean, I
Mhm.
definitely think it's a positive to see that data science has been embraced
Mhm.
and so many people are recognizing the need for training and learning, and it does seem to bring a new level of excitement.
Mhm.
So I definitely think that's positive.
Wow. Yeah, it's almost like we need the rest of the world to catch up, right?
Yeah.
You see the influence of technology on society. It's funny, until you mentioned it the second time, I was like, yeah, I dabbled in that a little bit. Because when I first started my research project, I explored, ArcGIS online, and I took a little, they had this free data science, and I said, oh, I started it, and I was like, you know what? Completely out of area of expertise. The amount of hours it would need for me to master this, it's just better I just have somebody else do it. I know I have, in part of the project, well, I had some students dabble in it, but I guess until the world really needs it in terms of, when I say needs it, I should clarify, can monetize it, right? Because that's what is a driver for so many things that are fairly basic already. Sometimes it's waiting for the world to catch up and hopefully drive change, back and forth. But I think that the why, absolutely. I want to ask you, I'm also going to see if there are any questions. What, in your observations, what are some things, other than what you said, if you can think of other things we should change about the way and how we teach math? And I wrote a question there, and I'm trying to understand my own handwriting. What are some things you could think about if you take a moment? What would advice and you would give?
About how we teach math.
Mhm.
Well, there's, and this is just, these are not necessarily my original ideas, but just what
Mhm.
um, I've seen, I've heard, one thing is, some things I'll just say is it's driven by, how many students are in your class. If they're smaller classes, you have a little bit more flexibility, I think, in terms of how you move through the material, and just might be a little bit easier to do some more innovative
Yeah.
approaches. But, project-based learning in math, that's definitely an approach that a lot of people have advocated for. So having students do projects, particularly in calculus. I know that's something that some of our faculty have tried to integrate into calculus. But again, these real world connections,
Mhm.
moving students out of the classroom
Mm.
to either do, for instance, some data collection, bringing it,
Mhm.
something that's different that takes them out of their seats where, they're used to thinking of, math as, sitting, taking
Mm.
notes. So I think,
Like that.
changing the structure of the
Mhm.
class, having students be more interactive. I know that some of our newly hired academic coaches have come to me with a few ideas about, yeah, I really just think, students need to feel more engaged in the
Mm.
math class. So I think the more engagement, the more we can get the students out of their seats, coming to the board, or maybe even going out. Like you said, relating it to physics, doing some type of
Mhm.
something that where they're trying to figure out how long it would take to travel
Mhm.
to somewhere, or an object to travel. I think that would be helpful. I
Wow.
think the engagement. I also, think that it's good to, one thing that I try to do is to bring in a little bit of history,
Mm.
to really encourage, we hear more and more people talk about belonging in,
Mhm.
right? And people have started really exploring this more. The two African American high school students who discovered new ways to prove the Pythagorean theorem. So
Mhm.
when I taught the second half of college algebra and trig,
Mhm.
in 2024, I was so excited. And I would say that is probably the best lecture that I had. I pulled up
Mhm.
a video talking
Nice.
about the students,
Mhm.
and with their explaining how they came up with this proof.
Yeah.
And my students were so intrigued. That was my, I feel like, again, that was the best class that I had, because they were so excited to see these two African American high school girls who had come
Yeah.
up with this new proof.
Yeah.
Um, and so they could see themselves, and I said, okay, good. Yeah. So now they understand, yeah, the Pythagorean theorem. This is something I can do.
Awesome. Yeah.
And I was so excited because I went back and I sent a text to two of my friends in California, and I said, "Guess what I just did?"
Mhm.
I showed this to my students, and they really enjoyed this, and they were really tuned in.
Yeah.
And yeah, it was great. I really just think that was just a moment of seeing all of my students being excited about math and about the
Yeah.
Pythagorean theorem.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Wow. There's so many things that concern me too. I love the examples you gave because it really speaks to process in terms of how to get there. A lot of times we don't necessarily know how to get there because we might say, "Oh, include critical thinking," and then the objective is, "Oh, kids, today we will think critically," right? As opposed to actually doing the critical thinking.
Yes.
Or having someone who, or maybe we think it's okay that if someone thinks algorithmically, that we have them create these critical thinking. And we don't quite understand the type of skills needed to go there. And a lot of times it requires a way of thinking, and the question is, how do you, if you're leading this way, spot that way of thinking? Right? Because again, we're talking about repeated year after year decision making that leads you down, not really seeming to have a solution, right? I think for me, one of the things I was going to say something that from what you said is, oh, one of the that's why I write notes. One of the thing that I think I can see hindering us is seeing math as always right and wrong, right? There's a right answer, a wrong answer, because that's the complete opposite of what you said with the students, discovering, oh, there's another way to do this,
Yeah.
right? And I could see, us focusing on the need to simply have this right answer. And I know that that's why they came up with there's two ways now, there's three ways, right?
Yeah.
But it's still very, I'm trying to figure what's the word to use. It's like more of the same. How is that? It's still stiff in that way. It's just more of the same couched differently, right?
Right.
Let's see.
I think sometimes people, and I don't know if I probably can't even come up with the term, but some people have the approach to teaching, just giving the problem and just letting the students work and come up with the solution. And so they're not so concerned about coming up with the correct solution, but more of the process of how the student is thinking through the problem.
Um,
So, but that kind of that goes back to some approaches are easier when you have a smaller class,
right,
as opposed to just a class of, I don't know, 32 students we have. But yeah, that's tough. That's a tough problem. The right answer versus your thinking through,
right.
um, yeah, the critical thinking part. I don't have the best answer
Yeah.
for how to go
No, it's
about that.
fine.
Yeah.
I mean, these are great. I think what you said was really important because what I've observed too is the class size, right? And what I've observed even obviously in the black schools from talking to students who have graduated, you might see there's a number of students posted on the website, but that's not the reality of their classrooms, right?
Exactly.
All of these places where they say they pour money into the system, where they say they're giving money, have big classrooms. And no matter what and how much money they've poured into these places, that hasn't changed. That essential bit
Yes.
hasn't changed. And so what ends up happening a lot of times is we pretend we're making all these solutions, but still not really changing where it matters, right?
Yes.
Which is in the classroom size because it does matter, you know.
Yes, that's so true. Being able to just stop and kind of give that one-on-one when you realize that there's a student that needs a little
Uh-huh.
bit more attention. It makes a difference. Even I think in terms of students' willingness to participate,
Uh-huh.
and you have to feel comfortable enough to make a mistake. If you want to have, students come to the board, and students have to, be okay with that. And I think it's, so much easier, make a mistake in front of a few students. But if that's hard, that's very hard. It's hard for students to feel, have that level of comfort.
Wow. Wow. I'm also thinking too of the scenario where, you know, you're going to, where someone is saying, okay, think about it, right? There's only so much thinking you can do. It's going to be dependent on your experience that you bring, right? And so you can think yourself to the ground hour through, and nothing, right? Because you haven't had an experience, you haven't been giving those list of skills, or acquire those list of skills, or the thinking doesn't really utilize, students' own experiences, right? So in other words, it's not facilitated well. And we often think, oh, it's the student not thinking versus, well, we just need to figure out what are the best ways to facilitate thinking.
Yes, that's true. Yeah. And with math, sometimes, there's certain foundational information. Yeah. And sometimes, I have to be very careful just with the math language,
Mm,
notation, symbols.
yeah.
Sometimes I really have to catch myself, and I have to stress to my students, let me know if you've never seen this. Some students have, some students have not.
Mm,
So
yeah.
I often teach an elementary statistics class, and
Mm-hmm.
we have the sigma notation for
Mm-hmm.
summation. Some have seen it, some have not.
Yeah.
And so if you're just confused by the symbols, the
Mm-hmm.
language, the facilitator has to be very careful that we're all
Right.
speaking the same language when we are, doing
Right. Makes
that.
sense.
Yeah.
Wow. Well, I just have one last question. I'm going to just pause for a second and see if there are any questions or anyone with. I think I see. Okay. Thought I'd see. Okay. So yeah, we are live. I don't see any questions. Okay. So what are some recommendations? Any other recommendations you have about the direction we should go in improving mathematics in the U.S. and what it's whether in the K-12 space, college space, both, either. What recommendations, other recommendations you would make?
Yeah. Well, I certainly, as I mentioned, I really believe in enrichment programs.
Mm-hmm.
And the more enrichment activities, because it's so hard to get everything done in the classroom.
Mm-hmm.
I really felt that I benefited from that, and I
Mm-hmm.
still think that there's a program here at Central for
Mm-hmm.
incoming freshmen, aspiring Eagles.
Mm-hmm. Nice.
So students can take math. They can take a math class
Mm-hmm.
over the summer before before their first semester.
Mm-hmm.
And I would love, I've said this before, and of course, if we had all the money in the world, but to see that program expanded
Mm-hmm.
so that more students could come in and actually take, even if it's not their first math class, but to take some type of, can call it a bridge course
Mm-hmm.
or prep course. I do think we need to be careful with the language. We don't,
Mm-hmm.
the whole, remedial, I'm not saying,
Mm.
would not want to
Yeah.
call it that, but just some type of supplemental math um, would be really helpful. Um, and again, even the summer, I mentioned that, when I was, still in middle school, I felt that I had this summer drain where I kind of lost my skills over the summer.
Mm-hmm.
Any type of summer enrichment for
Mm-hmm.
students, I think that would be so helpful just to keep the mathematical thinking, the mathematical learning going
Mm-hmm.
so that students, when they come back for the new year, they feel that they're ready and that they haven't forgotten. So any type of enrichment, I would definitely think that would be a good direction to go in.
Wow. And that's an important point, the enrichment part, because enrichment costs, right? Especially for families who can't afford it. That's not going to happen for them. Oftentimes enrichment will happen for people who can't afford to pay for enrichment, because I know because we pay for enrichment.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. I was very fortunate, and I did some summer enrichments when I was in high school. I found a few programs. But you're absolutely right. There aren't enough for
Mm-hmm.
everyone, and it does cost. So
Mm-hmm.
that's
It
definitely
costs.
a barrier. But I
Wow.
do think that also, I think as advisors, as professors, instructors, teachers, parents, to stress to maintain a positive attitude towards math,
Mm-hmm.
because our children, our students
Mm-hmm.
are listening and watching.
Right.
And I do experience this. Students just have often developed this negative attitude towards math.
Mm-hmm.
And it comes from perhaps their parents didn't have a positive experience with math. And so the more we can promote math in a positive light,
Mm-hmm.
that's kind of my mission, to really bring a positive message about math,
Mm.
about how
Wow.
math is useful in
Yeah.
so many different ways. I think that would just really help students to feel empowered to take math and to move through a math class and to just want to learn and
Mm-hmm.
to help them have. I want to help students have better experiences with math.
Yeah. Oh my gosh, it's so important you said that because so many times, our society doesn't see our attitudes towards something affects, other people's engagement and our students. And oftentimes we feel the need to express, I wasn't good at that. And, oh, this was not good for me. And the continuous need to express that negativity, you know, reinforces that it's okay to be negative about it. And people don't realize, and especially the unintentional people, right? People, it's not their intention, but sometimes we just have to, because the glass was half empty for us, it's like we don't realize we're taking away the opportunity for it to be half full, because we're projecting that negative experience. We're projecting that negative perspective. We're projecting that negativity, and it's, and I know it's hard. It's hard. You can't be more than who you are, right? But that is part of the battle. The thinking, we're battling the thinking, even as instructors, to get children from A to B. Like you said, and this is something we have to remember. It's not all going to be covered in the classroom, because I got to see, even though I like the class my son is in, I got to see, how, wow, when it comes to certain topics, they skipped over. I was like, wait a second, that's really important. You're just not going to be able to cover it all. And so, it's why, I have him in, you know, getting additional help, a couple times a week, so that he doesn't have those gaps,
Right.
and that was the biggest thing, capping those gaps are, it's like, how do you have gaps already? You just started, how you haven't even gone in the middle of elementary, you have gaps, like, that's ridiculous.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so, those large classrooms and all these factors. Wow. Well, any more takeaways before we end? I really appreciate. This was amazingly insightful. Thank you.
Thank you for the opportunity. Now, it was good to talk about, just to talk about math and to
Mhm.
be able to talk about the state of math. And it's, something I feel very passionately about. And I hope that I'm projecting this onto my students. And
Absolutely.
I appreciate your interest, and thank you for inviting me.
Well, thank you for joining. I mean, obviously this conversation could go on and on, on and on. And I'm going to make myself stop now. So thank you so much, Dr. Weems, for joining Learning for Truth and Love. And if you all enjoy this podcast, please like and follow so that you can, hear about the next one. Thank you.
Thank you.
Press stop.